they need to know that you're a fan of them and that you'll give them grief because they're worth it. And some of that is just like being genuinely caring about them and think that they have potential. They have to feel it and they have to believe it. I was asked, what do I look for in a leader? One of the things that came to mind was emotional intelligence, having a good connection with what you're feeling, why you're feeling that way, and just being in tune with yourself. I think we have to evolve beyond just kind of swallowing it or just pushing it down and pushing it back. But, that's a community effort.
You are listening to the Akkeri podcast, a show about men and masculinities, the challenges that modern men face, and how to chart a better way forward. I'm your host, Matt Howlett, mental health coach and founder of the Akkeri. In this episode, we dive into the world of youth care with social worker Shawn Mercer. Shawn has spent over 20 years in and around the child youth care and social work fields, so he has an educated and unique perspective into the challenges that some men are facing, as well as the solutions. Shawn is a man who loves his partner, travel, and wood stoves, and is a passionate advocate for community development. Well, Mr. Shawn Mercer, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I met you through Jason Walsh, RNC officer that I had on the podcast a couple episodes back. And he mentioned that you were in youth care.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you've been doing that for how long now?
I've been in and around youth care for about 21 years now.
Wow.
In like child youth care capacity, educator, social work as well. So in care, out of care, employment, outreach, you kind of name it. Some of the varieties of youth care that you would do,
Right. Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the main thing I wanted to jump into, but what I like to do, because I'm, going to assume there's a whole lot of people that don't know yourself, don't know your story. Can you give us just like, Cole's Notes background? Where'd you come from? What brought you into that world?
Cool. Yeah. We'll do that. Yeah. So I always tell people I'm from Newfoundland and Labrador because I was born in Bay Vert, but I ended up kind of in every little nook and cranny, kind of Port aux Basques and Glovertown, Ferryland, Mount Pearl.
Yep.
I've moved around a lot with my family when it comes to their work and things like that. So that's kind of like where I come from. I'm from the island. I'm an island guy.
Yeah.
And I guess really, how I got into youth care. I mean, originally it started with trying to pay the bills when I was in university, and
okay.
Kind of starting off that way. And my interest in youth care kind of expanded when it came to, in my early 20s. I became more political, and kind of philosophy and community became really important to me. And sure. I guess I wanted to find a way to be a part of the community and do my part. To help engage with people who might not have had the same chances that maybe I did, and get a leg up in certain areas. And yeah, I guess that kind of just gravitated to I did youth care work in group care. Some people call it residential care.
Yep.
I did 5 years of social work in care and protection over in the UK.
Cool.
That kind of kickstarted my social work career. And in 2008, we moved home, and I worked a little bit with Eastern Health, and went back to group care for a while, and did 5 years as an educator in child and youth care with addiction support. And then on from there, I went and did 5 years with a family-based care supervisory kind of program, and looking after the youth staff or the youth care workers who look after the youth. And right now, I'm in education, employment, and social enterprise work. So,
right.
Kind of done a few things in the career now, and that's kind of where I'm at now.
Right. So, is there anything about your life, your personal life, that brought you into that specifically? Like, was there any experiences growing up, anything that was like really good and you wanted to share that, or really bad and you understand where youth are coming from? Like, is there anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a blend of personal things that have happened. Some of them are perhaps more positive light, some of them are more negative. I think that, personally, I mean, when I was growing up, my dad was a police officer, and my mother was a reverend in a church.
No way.
And yeah. So I mean, I think from the start of it, I think I learned kind of justice from my dad, and the social aspect. I think I learned kind of more from my mom.
Right.
So that's where probably the social justice stuff came in. Weird now that I'm an atheist, and I'm kind of like, well, I kind of had to make my own little kind of carve out and everything else. But
Sure.
I took lessons from them for sure. I think growing up and all that, I definitely I had my own mental health struggles, and I had to kind of figure out my way when it came to what was going on for me.
Yeah.
And I also, tough living in a small rural community when you're the cop's son.
I bet. Yeah.
All right, got my ass kicked a few times. Right.
That
So
Mercer kid.
it's one of those things. But I really think, I was always kind of interested and in tune with, even though might not have known it at the time, but I was always interested in like in politics and how communities are built, whether that's, whether that was in our church or whether that was in our community or whether that was, in a local rec league, like it was always kind of an interesting thing about power dynamics and how things were. And I just saw my community. I saw times where, we weren't so strong and times where we needed to strengthen and things like that. So for me, it was always about being a community member. So that's kind of where my interest kind of came from.
Right.
There's no like one moment or one event or anything like that, but I do know that, as I got older in my 20s, I spent a little bit of time being homeless, and I was thinking to myself, like, how did this happen? And I was kind of like, I had some people around me that helped support me out of it, and I want to think that's kind of what drove me to want to help assist with people in my day to day and have a life.
You just said you were homeless for a period of time.
Yeah, for a little while. Yeah, university. Yeah, I was. It was privileged homelessness because I was able to live out of my old car.
Okay.
But it was during university, and at the time, actually, believe it or not, I was doing a field placement for an agency who supported youth who were homeless, and
no way.
I ended up becoming one of those young people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So many different ways we can go, but now that we're kind of into it, I kind of want to hear more about the personal side before we get into the work side. What was going on in life at that period of time? Did you say you were homeless, like living in your car while you were in school?
Yeah, in university.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And just for everybody listening, you're in St. John's, right?
I am St. John's.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you studied at Memorial University.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did that all come to be?
Man, it was one of those things where I guess just with regards to our family life and how we communicated, we didn't always have forward communication and,
Sure.
and assertive communication, and I guess a lot of things don't get dealt with when that kind of dynamic is happening. And I guess there's things in our family, people weren't very happy.
Yeah.
We weren't each other, and people's needs weren't getting met. And I endured a lot of stress when it came to kind of what was going on in my family. And
Okay.
at some point, I just realized like I couldn't take it anymore, and I didn't need to live in these conditions.
Right.
And,
So it's almost primarily your own decision, is what I'm hearing.
yeah, well, it was. I mean, it was not my decision to have to endure all the stress that was going on or what was
Sure.
being around me.
Yeah.
But I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And I didn't have, like, I have family that are on the island, but outside the island, I have family that are in BC.
Yeah.
I moved around a lot, so moving around and kind of the Rolling Stone thing was not new for me.
Yeah.
But I just it was just hurting too much to be living in that household and not being heard and not getting what I needed.
Right.
And I decided that enough was enough. So
Yeah. Was that your undergrad while you were studying undergrad?
Yeah, I'm a social worker.
Okay. How many years in were you when that kind of started, when you were starting in your car?
Probably. So I did 2 years pre-social work, and that was a 5-year degree program at the time.
Wow.
So it would have been in my third year, going into my fourth year, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Jeez,
Yeah.
wow, man. Sorry, that's an intense situation, especially like going through undergrad. I can't
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't easy. It's I think I guess you can always say, like, oh, people had it harder than me, and there's also people who had it easier than me too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes comparison is helpful, but I mean, like, how far do you want to go with it, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I'm trying to be balanced about it, really.
Yeah. Well, speak to me about, speak to me. You are speaking to me. Talk to me a little bit about what that experience was like, how that translated into the work that you do now. Because obviously, like, I mean, I'm sure there were other experiences that you pull from. I mean, as we all do, and things that we learn through just random ongoings in life. But what was that like specifically? Or, I mean, do you have anybody that you're dealing with now, or you have worked with that has been in a similar situation?
All good. I mean, I would say similar. I mean,
Yeah.
I know, no two situations are alike, but I guess I spent a lot of time working with youth, especially young males who are dealing with homelessness.
Right.
And I want to preface this with, like, I don't think, just because I'm a person with lived experience, I don't promote that a whole lot. Like, I don't speak about this a whole lot. I don't put all my weight into being a person with lived experience. I believe, like, skill set and all kinds of experiences kind of are helpful.
Of course.
But that said, it does kind of I guess I don't want to look through my own lens, but I can see the lens of how things happen for people, and taking blame off people for the situations that they're in. I think that we have some responsibility with regards to the choices we make. However, there are some times where we have little choices, or we have few choices, and sometimes those choices are provided to us. And I guess I can empathize with folks who don't feel choices, or feel like they got to get away from a situation if it's not safe, or if it's not good for their health, right? So
yeah, well, lived experience is a great recipe for empathy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I know that it's not just an academic exercise. Then it's kind of like, you can learn techniques, but there has to be that human component to it too. So
yeah, well, talk to me more about that, because, like, obviously in the work that I'm doing, the human component is that I carry some of the weight of whatever it is that the man that I'm working with is going through. I mean, I think about it from time to time. Some of that is from more of I want to think of a way to interact, to intervene in a more helpful way. It's more practical, but some of it is just, man, like, I'm a dude, I'm a human. I've probably, went through something similar, or maybe even the exact same thing. Because a lot of what I focus on with guys is lived experience, right? The things that I've been through, the things that I've learned. But like you said, skill set, all that comes into it. But like, what do you feel? What am I trying to say here? Like, in the run of a week, what is that experience like for you? That lived experience, that the lived component, where, like, you are carrying some of the weight. You know what I mean? How do you process that? Because you're in it. You're dealing with youth on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, it's a little different now, because the capacity and work that I do now is more supporting staff, and supporting the youth, supporting the coordinators. But in that being said, in the last couple of years, I have certainly done direct work with youth, and do carry some of those things. And I guess for me, it's just finding different outlets and different ways to kind of balance things out. Like, as you mentioned, I think that's a nice way of putting it. You do have a tendency to carry some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about taking a break from carrying it. And I think that's where healthy boundaries and things like that come into play. So
yeah,
I do find ways to switch off from work. I do find ways to, decompress. I have a really nice, I have really nice friends. I have an excellent family life. So, just kind of, sometimes unpacking, or like decompressing at the end of the day, and just finding ways to relax and not take it all on, and not not be responsible for it all is really, really important.
Yeah. Can you,
so
sorry, can you just speak to some specifics around that? Because I feel like whenever something like this comes up, like this is a habitual thing. You know what I mean? Like, well, at least that's what it should be if you want to be a healthy individual. You know what I mean? Because like you're working and okay, not right now with youth that are say in crisis, but over the years you have, and you have to have these daily habits in order to not carry it and not stress yourself out. So what does that look like specifically? Because I think a lot of men, we have the tendency to kind of push it down, or at least try to act as if it doesn't matter as much, because we don't always see the impact of unprocessed emotions, you know, on our physiology. You know what I mean? So what is that like for you specifically?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think for me, you know, I find, you know, it for me, it's a self-care thing, and I'll talk about like specifics now. And I think self-care is not an activity, but it's a way of being.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes part of a routine. So, for example, I'll give you really kind of like a couple simple examples for me. Like, for me, every day, one of my hobbies is around burning wood and cutting wood.
Yep.
You know, wood, curing it, drying it, stacking it, and then preparing it for the fireplace, which we have in the house here.
Oh, nice. Jealous.
Yeah, it's on tonight. We're here. Oh, you'd be boiling.
It's the best eat you can have, man. Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
But like, you know, it's not mindless, but it's not, for me, it's not abstract. It's a concrete thing that I can do. And it's something that has a routine. It's something that's physical, which, you know, is part of like getting exercise.
Yep.
You know, I'm not someone who goes to the gym for exercise. I find other ways to get my exercise, and that can be one of them. And,
absolutely,
you know, something nice about, you know, and I think about things in like, I think about like our relationship with things a lot of times, think about things in terms of relationships. So, you know, in my relationship with that, you know, there's a relationship with control that, you know, I can control where the wood goes and how it is. And there's even an artistic component to it, like the way you want to stack it and the way that you present it and all that. So I think there's pieces of that are really, really helpful. And, you know, it's hard work sometimes, but it's also kind of easy work at times. It's not too hard on the head. It can be hard on the hands. But no, I think like, you know, just that whole routine of doing some of those things, there's something really nice and something really natural and grounding about that. So I really like that thing, you know. And I also, you know, to tell you the truth, you know, another simple example in the day is, you know, I have a social brain. There's no question about it. But, you know, I tend to teeter with like my introversion and my extroversion, and I have to allow my introversion to be expressed too. So I do like to take some time in the evenings, and there's like lots of times where I won't be connected to my phone. There'll be times where, you know, I just need my away time from people, and, you know, working with people and working through their stuff and in their all that stuff. Sometimes you just need away from that, and you need to away from people. So I take space too. I take some space from people, and I kind of enjoy my alone time. I never would have said that 20 years ago, but I definitely think so now, that I thrive on that. And
yeah. Are you in an area that you enjoy, like being outside in general? Like, you know, today here in St. John's, we had a great day, nice weather, good fall day. Yeah.
The fall too. Yeah, no, we have a park not too far, so like we can walk there, and driving past is really, really nice. And my good friend and I, we built a cabin a few years ago up the shore. And,
nice.
Yeah, there's times where, you know, if Maureen can't make it up with me, I might just do a night by myself in the cabin and kind of just do the recluse thing, and just kind of just take time and space and just be like in nature and just kind of enjoy the quiet, which I relish.
Mm-hmm. Does this type of conversation come up with the youth, or even the youth leaders that you work with? Like, you know, even the same type of questions that I'm asking you, because you're in more of a leadership role now. So like, how do you encourage them? Do you see that in their lives, this type of conversation come up?
I mean, do you mean like things that they do to look after themselves?
Yeah, well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are in a position now where you're kind of helping other leaders in their projects, but you're also dealing with, I mean, you're working with some students, some youth, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they're not necessarily like, it's not necessarily the group home care context.
No,
It's not really youth in crisis. Okay. Yeah. So that's what I was curious about. It's like, are you passing that along, or do you have opportunity for that? Like a mentoring opportunity.
right. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I think that one of the things, like the conversation has certainly changed in the last few years with respect to how we support each other within the social care context. And I mean, for me, yeah, I mean, I I I like to know the people, like the people I'm supporting, whether that's be youth or that be like youth care workers or coordinators. What charges your battery? What
Right.
what deplete batteries? And if obviously there's a boundary component as well, but if they allow for it, it's having conversations about how you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
And do you need to stay plugged in socially, or is there something you need to do differently this weekend, or something to do this differently this evening, so that you can be at work and be okay? And if you can't be okay, like, what is there anything we can do to support you to be okay, and maybe even get you back to work? I think the pandemic and a few things have really kind of changed the way people kind of interact and have relationships with work and with colleagues and things like
Yeah.
that too. So, yeah, I think that some of those conversations about how people are looking after themselves, I'm generally curious about that with the people I support,
Yeah.
and hoping that they're able to be in a space that they can take those opportunities. Number one, it's good for the work, but more importantly, it's the person, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of the things about youth care that gave me the most satisfaction, was the opportunities, although it seemed like they were few and far between, to like really get through to a youth that you're working with. It was usually guys, but we did have a girl there, I think maybe 2 or 3. And I was 3 years with Waypoints. I don't remember because we only met in person once. But
Oh yeah.
yeah. So the 3 years that I did with Waypoints, and I think all 3 of them were with our mutual friend Jason, is those opportunities that we had to really have like just a genuine conversation. You know what I mean? Where there was like kind of low stress, the youth that you're working with on that shift, or in general, if you're at a specific house, where they're actually opening up to you and having like a real conversation. You know what I mean? And it's not always like, me teaching you how to live life, but just 2 of us doing life together. You know what I mean? I learn from you, you learn from me. We carry each other's burdens. We have conversations about things that matter and help each other out. You know what I mean? That was the kind of work, or the aspect of that work, that made that very satisfying for me. A lot of times it was stress. I think more memories of stress and of feeling like I'm just trying to keep everything together. No one gets hurt, no one burns the house. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
hopefully the cops don't have to come by. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, I hear that. Yeah, I mean, I think teachable moments is not about teaching someone, directly lecture or anything like that. I mean, I remember at one of the programs I worked in, Sunday evenings, and we were supposed to have group, during the midday, and nobody ever wanted group, and no one talked about feelings and all that kind of stuff. But every now and then, the guys be coming home, and for me, I put on the kettle and have a cup of tea. That's one of the things I do every day, just to have a cup of tea. And
right.
Knows that I'll have the kettle and put the kettle on, and I have a teapot and everything. I've had a teapot everywhere I've worked. And sometimes the boss coming back at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, half hour past curfew, and I'd hear, "Put on the fucking teapot, Shawn," and all that kind of. And then all of a sudden, before they're going to bed, which is past their bedtime, past their curfew and all this stuff, but they're telling about their day, and like, things happened in their day that, even though they were supposed to do programming stuff, they didn't. Other things came up, so we were able to have a relationship that way. Sit down in like a somewhat calm environment,
Yeah,
and have a cup of tea and just listen, and chat. And it's not clinically feel, and it's got that just human to human connection, right? And so, yeah, I mean,
that's what matters. Yeah, I always found that was challenging, because I think specifically in the youth care context, you've got what was it they used to call us? Fish? Like when you were, is that the term when you're new?
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if I had that correctly, but yeah, I mean, like, they're kind of sussing you out, right? And especially for those who didn't have like a permanent position, because I don't know the way it is like in the organizations you work for, or maybe the way it is now with Waypoints, I'm not sure. But back when I was there, I think almost my full first year, I was just building up hours and applying for positions. So I was just, bouncing between, I think it was like 7 different houses at that point. Right. Yeah. So I, see one guy one day and maybe not see him again for like another 2 weeks, or he could be gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that creates that whole rhythm and system of like having to test you out, like, are you to be trusted and all that kind of stuff, because, they don't see you the whole lot. And, all that stuff I think comes from like an emotional area, like trying to test you out, and you got to kind of prove it to them that like, yeah, I can hold water or not. Right. So,
well, yeah. Or even just that you're a safe person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, they're not going to get that in a shift. They're not going to get that in a week.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hours that need to be put into that, and a lot of energy, but it's certainly worth it. And you can see it when you get that relationship with a young person, but it's very that situation when you're bouncing around. I know.
Yeah. So speaking of bouncing around, you moved around a fair bit. Did you do this type of work in those other places? I know you did in the UK. That's what you mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah, no, like bouncing around early when I was younger was stuff with my dad and his work and stuff. But yeah, like bouncing around now. I did 2004, 2008. I was in the UK.
Okay,
and then coming back here, primarily been in the St. John's region. So I've worked with youth, like say in St. John's, also like Conception Bay South, Conception Bay North.
Yeah. So what I'm kind of trying to get at is that you've seen different ways of doing it. I don't know if the systems, I'm assuming there's differences between the different like programming and the way that the workers would interact with students and how often they get to see them, or, like shift work at, when I started, and then eventually I got a position where I was at one house all the time. You know what I mean? Definitely gave me more opportunity, but I actually had a night shift, so I didn't see them all the time. But, first thing in the morning, I remember one guy always wanted bacon in the mornings, right? And I had to learn that he didn't like it as crispy as I liked it, because I just that was my default. I make crispy bacon. And he'd come in, he had a hard St. John's accent. He'd be like, "Matt boy, like you burnt me bacon." And I hope to God he hears this, right? And has a good laugh about it, because I know I did. I did it that way once, and that was it. But I'll get away from bacon. Did you see like a better way of doing it, or do you think that this is just the way that the system kind of functions, and you can get a lot of good work done with this setup, but it's got its limitations? You know what I mean? Like, what do you think about all that?
I mean, I've seen, residential care or group care when you have like 8 young people living there, and, all kinds of staff. And I've also seen it with just 2 people and siblings. And I've seen, independent living arrangement where there's just one kid and there's one staff. And, of course, varying degrees of needs of the youth is always a piece, when it comes to like, their cognitive abilities, or, if they lash out, depending on kind of how they express things physically.
Sure.
I definitely saw differences. I seen differences in the UK, and I saw differences when I came back. I was fortunate to be part of supporting like family-based care, which is kind of like a professionalized foster care type of situations. I think that unfortunately starts early, right? Like a lot of these kids, they have like attachment stuff going on early. They've role models who have imprinted violence and things like that early. And I think that, unless governments or nonprofits or the state can intervene early, we're going to continue to have things like, programs where there's 4 and 5 kids who have lots of trauma and lots of emotional and behavioral issues, and we put them with, and I mean, can it work? I mean, I guess it can work, but I mean, what does it mean to work? Like, they're going to get back to their families. That would be great. It's no good to see kids bopping around. I've seen kids bopping around in the care system for, 11, 12, 13 years, and they're 11, 12, 13 years old and not adopted and not back with family of origin. So, I think that, like, the reality is it comes down to resources a lot of times. And if we're not going to put the resources in it, then we're going to have certain outcomes for young people. And, kids
Right.
who know that they're hurting and they're around other hurting kids, and it's tough,
Yeah.
right?
What do you think? I was going to say what is the main thing, but there's definitely more ways than just one of getting through to a student, getting through to a youth. I keep saying student because that's like the world I was in for a while as a youth pastor. But
Gotcha.
how do you get through to a kid that is as struggling, and like the methods that have the most impact, we'll say? You know what I mean? There's probably several, like in that talk with Jason, it keeps coming to mind because we talked a little bit about this.
Yeah.
It's like, what are the, like, you're talking about resources. Well, where do you invest those resources? Right.
Yeah. For as far as like techniques and resources and things like that are concerned on the crossover, I spent a lot of energy with providing empathy and understanding, and wanting to find out how did you decide to make that decision. How did you decide to rob that store, or how did you decide to make that crack pipe, and like just trying to be like genuinely, don't have to try, just be genuinely curious as to how they make their decisions, and be curious about how they got to this stage, and ask questions. But I also think too, is it's the building of the relationship is everything for me. So, if it's, doing ball hockey stuff, or they want to learn how to cook something,
Right.
or, if they want to read, or get involved in something. I think that, we all got to figure out something that we're good at. Some of the kids that we've worked with, they're really good at pissing staff off. They're really good at that. That's a skill, and I think that it needs to be celebrated. Some of these things need to be celebrated because they're good at it, and it might be an adaptive kind of an adaptive thing that they've needed to do. But I think, like, they need to know that you're a fan of them, and that you'll give them grief because they're worth it. And some of that is just like just being genuinely caring about them, and think that they have potential, and they
Yeah.
need to feel. They can't just be told that. They have to feel it, and they have to believe it.
Right.
So, I remember one time, I was working with a youth, and he was quite young, and I remember in the evening, we were trying to get the lads settled, and of course they weren't settled, and bedtime can be tough for a lot of the kids that we work with. And I remember he wanted to be read a bedtime story, and of course he had a sharp as well in his hand. And we weren't at a stage where we could do a cutting contract because he was too young. And, he was there cutting himself, and I was reading him a story in his bed, and he was like, "Shawn, this is the most relaxed I've been all day." And he just fell asleep. So, like, I didn't have to wrestle the
Wow.
sharp. I just had to take it and like tuck him in, and he went to bed. And I saw him actually a few weeks ago, and it was like 4 years ago, 13, 14 years ago since I worked with him. And we were just having a chat or whatever, and he's doing really well. Like, he's had a lot of, oh my gosh, he's gone through a lot in his young life, but he seems to be doing well. And I think about that,
Yeah.
kind of met him where he was at, and that's what he needed in that time. And it's not something you can always do, but when you got those opportunities, you got to take a risk. And
Yeah. That sounds like the personal connection. Is that a good way to name that?
definitely, yes. I think personal connection is everything. Like, I think there's sometimes a bit of a shift of, like, in social care, of like managerialism versus care. We can't forget the care part, and the care has to be that human connection. So
Yeah.
we got to find those little moments, and it's not going to be like a Hollywood, it's not going to be like a Hollywood ending or a Hollywood event, but we do have to find those moments where, when they're vulnerable, that we see them.
What do you think are the requirements for that? I'm kind of assuming, obviously, empathy. You got to be able to, empathize with the person you're working with. But what else do you see that really works well in youth care workers? Because obviously, this is going to translate across to just about anybody, not even specific fields, but just human interaction. You know what I mean? How can we get to a place where we have that ability to make a genuine personal connection? Like, I ask about this because this is something that I'm very passionate about with the work with the Akkeri. I think men need to work on this aspect of themselves, of being able to share more about themselves. You know what I mean? To talk about our feelings, talk about our emotions, talk about our thoughts. You know what I mean? Talk about why something is hard.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's kind of helpful for my thinking here now, is that I think about, I was asked, not too long ago, like, what do I look for in a leader?
Hmm.
And leader, that can be formal or informal and everything. But, one of the things that came to mind was emotional intelligence,
Right.
and emotional intelligence, I'm not going to define it, but like, I think that's just, you know, having a good connection with what you're going through, what you're feeling, why you're feeling that way, and just being in tune with yourself. So, it starts with you, it starts with you. So, when it comes to like the skill sets and these types of things, I think like checking in with yourself and checking in with your people and being okay and making sure that that kind of stuff works for you to be in a good place. I think the sharing component that you talk about, uh, it's an interesting one, in youth care, because there's a boundary that needs to be kind of looked at, and I'm not saying that it's got to be a hard boundary, but depending on your relationship, then that can sway a little bit. And
Between the leader and the student, you mean?
it
Yeah.
was, yeah, exactly,
Right.
exactly. But I think there's a lot of distractions. We have a lot of distractions, and
Yeah.
one of the we have right now is this: you and me, we're having a conversation, and a lot of people find that very intimate. And a lot of males that I know, they don't like that. They're not in culture to have that one-on-one and have an intimate conversation, and it can be
Sure.
very scary, and it can be make them feel vulnerable, and maybe they didn't have the experiences with role models to be able to do those types of things. So I think allowing situations and spaces for males to say, that it's okay to talk about these things, and it's okay. Or it doesn't, it doesn't feel okay when things are bad and when things are hard and when things are tough. And I just think that it's okay to talk about it. And I don't know, a lot of kids I've worked with, they've acted out versus talking it out.
Yeah.
And
It's
I
much
think,
easier.
right, and yeah, and that's probably a more socially acceptable way of doing things, or maybe a family acceptable way of doing things, depending on where they're coming from. But
Yeah.
yeah.
You know what? That makes me think of my wife has been in that world. Like, she's a trained counselor, and we were having a conversation about that similar type of thing, about why they might do what they're doing, and why it is that's the easier choice, like to act out part of that. And like I was the kind of thing that I knew, but as soon as she said it, I was like, oh yeah, like that makes so much sense. And I kind of knew that, but I've never like really heard it spoken. Is that for a lot of them, I think the world that they're in, it's almost more helpful in some ways. I think it might seem more helpful at the time to have that strong outer shell. You know what I mean? Where at least you're projecting that, I'm tough. I don't need to talk about it. This is not that hard for me. I'm not feeling sad. You know what I mean? I'm just like, don't mess with me. Because like they're bouncing around from house to house. They're going in and out of juvie, whatever the situation is, right? And that's a tough spot to be in. I get it.
Yeah. Well, I think about it as, that shell that you talk about. That's one that's doesn't get that doesn't get developed overnight, and often these things are protective shells. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's about protecting. So they might feel the need to have to protect themselves and maybe save face amongst like circles and cultures that they're around. So it's not it's no there's no point in me judging it. I have to try to understand it. And even if they are like, if someone's taking a swing at me, or if someone has, kicked my car or whatever, I can easily look at a behavior, but to me, they're communicating. They're always communicating. They're communicating what's going on for them, and they're communicating a need.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
no, I'm not. I'm not. I don't want to pass it off as like, arsehole or anything like that. No,
I did that a couple of times. Yeah.
to use a pejorative, but I think that it's just important to like look at where it's coming from. And as you said, that tough outer shell, that shell, any shell that I know of, is not built to attack. A shell is meant to protect. So if that's what they need to do to keep themselves safe and to survive, then that's what they've needed to do. I just feel like, we have to make sure we create spaces and opportunities for them to see that there's other ways to do it, and learn that not every situation that they've been in is going to be like that going forward, that there can be safe people around and things like that. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's learned,
Have you seen education play a role in like the different programs that you've been part of? Like when you mentioned emotional intelligence is an important, we'll say, skill for someone to have, and not just as a youth care worker, but I mean, obviously for just about anybody. But I mean, have you seen any programs where it's more about education and teaching, the mind body connection, and how, it's super important to have that emotional intelligence and know how to, have healthy boundaries, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it to various degrees depending on where I've worked. I mean, there's places where, we've been trained, like therapeutic crisis intervention. That's one of them, and that how to effectively learn from debriefing and taking crisis and making that an opportunity for learning.
Mm.
And really, essentially, what it is finding other ways to cope that might be healthier or might be more beneficial for that person. I've worked in programs where we've spent more time doing some reflection and reflecting on kind of what's just happened and reflecting on what's about to come and things like that. I find that's really helpful. That's kind of a little bit more proactive.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a program per se, but say, when it comes to like my work with other social workers, we've reflected on kind of, the behaviors that we're seeing and what it's telling us, and what does that mean developmentally, and what does that mean neurodevelopmentally, and, what does that mean from a trauma-informed care perspective. And, I think, it's really important. One of the things that we've talked about in the last few years is not reacting to a behavior, but responding to a need. And that comes up through reflection, before, during, and after a crisis. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely programs out there that I've seen, that I've been a part of, that are in line with, whether it be harm reduction or whether it be, healthier coping. Unfortunately, some of the programs I've worked with, the kids are there and it's mandatory that they're there and they didn't ask to be there. And then some programs I've worked with youth, it's not mandatory and they choose to be there. And those are two very different groups of young people. So I think that matters too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that I've heard of even like programs that I've worked under, and they have like younger children, and there's a cognitive behavioral therapy type of piece involved when it comes to stopping and thinking about your actions before you do them and things like that. I think that early intervention stuff, really, Matt, I can't say it enough. I mean, that prevention stuff is just huge. Like getting a kid at 25 versus 15 versus 5. I have fortunately worked in those age groups, and early intervention is just so key, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you've mentioned, I suppose it's a concept a couple times now, like responding to not necessarily the behavior, but the need. Can you say more about that?
Well, I mean, like as an example, so, some of the kids that we work with, they might be neurodiverse, or they could be, they could have had trauma or what have you. And a lot of these young people, I guess, and children have a hard time expressing what it is they need.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's because they haven't gotten all their needs met. And I'm talking about basic needs, you know what I mean? Like food and a roof and water and, physical touch, and those types of things. So, it could be that, I know that like one kid, I'll tell you a little story now. A few years ago, a kid, we were at summer camp, and we had just met each other, and I was going to become his key worker. And I didn't know this at the time, but he didn't either. And we were at summer camp, and we were all having to mess around over by the wharf, and people were swimming. There was floaties and all that kind of stuff. And he was kind of like splashing me and all that, and all the guys were getting a rise out of that because like he was splashing me and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah. He said, "You keep that up." He said, "I'm going to get you back."
Yeah, pick on the youth care worker. Everybody loves that. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought we were having fun and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, as it happened, he kept on splashing me, kind of like doing all that thing, and I wasn't angry or anything. I was playing along. I kind of knew what was going on. And I remember, like, I went to pick him up and throw him in the water. I knew he could swim, and there was lots of safety and stuff around.
Right.
And he'd right in the balls, and it was, oh man, it was like, it was the hardest. Yeah. bad. It was really, really bad. And anyway, yeah, I dropped him on the wharf
Yeah.
and threw him in the water. But anyway, we had a chat. Myself and one of my colleagues had a chat after, and we subsequently had him in for a chat as well. And I could react, and one frame is to say that he assaulted me,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Sure.
I guess that's one framework. But one of the things we didn't know about, and we found like some of his history after, because like we were thrown together in summer camp, and it's not like father or anything, but I would have had access to it. But what we found out after is that like he'd been used by males in the past, and had been like physically and sexually abused.
Wow.
And like men had impressed their power upon him quite a bit. And we knew that like there was things going on with him. And I had a conversation with him, and I told him, and I wouldn't normally take responsibility for someone else's actions, but I apologized to him, and I told him something I shouldn't have done. And that's a human connection thing that we talked about earlier. And I said to him, I said, you probably felt really unsafe at that point in time.
Yeah.
Rather than react to his behavior, I was trying to respond to his emotional need. And we went on to have a great relationship. I actually worked with him for about 3 years after, and with his siblings as well, and did family visits and all kinds of other stuff. And we went to Montreal and did the half marathon there, and we did the Cape to Cabot together that same year, and we did the Telly 10 as well, and a couple 5Ks and 8Ks.
Right.
But you know what I mean? I'm saying, like, I think about it in terms of what was he doing, and how does this make sense?
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, that didn't make any sense, him needing me the balls. How does it make sense? And by thinking about it and talking about it and kind of getting more information as time went on, it was kind of like, you know what he did totally made sense.
Of course.
So I had to respond to that communication in a way that was going to be helpful. And that
was probably like a near automatic, it's a trauma response. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Do whatever he can to get out of that situation. Yeah.
Exactly. Knee to the balls, spit, you name it.
Yeah.
He would do it. And he had to learn that. He had to learn how to keep himself safe. And he had to learn a lot of things along the way, and he had a tough road. And one of the things that helped with me was kind of like that proximity and all that kind of stuff, and being a guy and being bigger and all those types of things. I got to take some learning from this. So if I can't expect him to learn from it, if I don't expect to learn from it myself, so there needs to be kind of a bit of back and forth too, right? So I hope that makes sense to your question.
Oh yeah, no, that makes great sense. Thanks for sharing that story. I mean, I think that's crucial. You know what I mean? And obviously, like, we're talking about youth care work, but I mean, pretty much everything that I can think of that you've said so far that we've talked about is transferable to just general, human to human interaction. You know what I mean? The importance of emotional intelligence, the importance of empathy, the importance of personal connection, the importance of shared learning and shared experiences. You know what I mean? I don't come in, like, even right now, we don't come into this conversation, as like one person's inferior to the other or any foolishness like that. You know what I mean? We're two people looking to have a conversation about a topic that we both find, interesting, see where the conversation goes, learn what we can, hopefully inspire some people in the process. You know what I mean? Yeah, I do. Yeah. There's no pissing contests here, and like the hierarchy stuff. It gets in the way. It just gets in the way of us guys sometimes. And I don't know. I find that it can be more meaningful conversation when it's not an expert to an inferior, like you said, and it's the human value and quality of sharing, right? Yeah, I mean, that's one of the other things that I can't remember now where exactly I wrote about this when I was like, the podcast started early in spring, and I was putting together the website around the same time. And I'm thinking back to the copy, the text on the web pages, and I was writing about how mentoring is just so crucial in male relationships. The older men mentoring younger, and having that. I suppose that community mindset. You know what I mean? Where you always have those role models. And I guess that's kind of leading me into something else that I wanted to ask you about, because you've bounced around in that world so much now and had so many different opportunities for mentoring. What do you think it is that, and not just in the youth context, but for men, what is it that breaks the cycle of, sons growing up to become their fathers and taking on the same challenges? Because obviously we see that in a youth care context. I don't know how many times I worked, say on a given night, which was family night. And like, the mom, the dad, the uncle, whoever would come over. And if you've been at that same house with those same kids a couple times, well, then you eventually see the family member that they're most like. And I don't know, man, it was just clockwork. Like I could always see like, oh, you picked up the exact same habits from them. And I don't mean to pick on, youth and care. I did the same thing with my father. I have my father's stubbornness, 100%. That's something I've had to work on over the years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you think it is that I think we both know how we get into that cycle, but how do we break that?
Yeah, that's that's a big question.
We need a solution now. Like, I mean, your next sentence is.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things that I think about is that, I know that like a lot of the men that I know, a lot of times their dads are their main imprint when it comes to what it is to be a man or what it is to be male and things like that. I think a lot of it is exposure. I'm just going to say simply exposure to other. And what that is that, you can have a male in your family who's big on dominance communication and who uses violence and things like that. I guess really it's about having young men collecting more experiences with other men who think other ways,
right,
and don't do it that way. I think that one of the challenges for me, and this is something that I've always kind of thought about and worked on is, just because you do something some way doesn't mean it doesn't have to be that way all the time. It doesn't have to be that way all the time. There are different ways of doing things. Well, and likewise, I think that, young men need to see other young men and older men who some of them, they go out and they got to do some sports and physical activity and that's helpful for them. But other ones, they might need to do meditation and talk or read and walk, different types of activities. And I know it's kind of activity based what I'm talking about now, but we often do activities together, and that's oftentimes kind of how males do this is kind
100%,
of like way we do things, right? So I think so. I think it's really like increasing a diversity of experiences of watching other males be in relationships and be in communication and things like that. You spoke about mentorship earlier. Like, I mean, my mentor, he's 72, 73 now, and he's probably my best friend. I met him in the UK. I get to see him once or twice a year. And, he kind of really showed me, about how to pace yourself in life and how to practice patience in a way that's really, really meaningful, and in a way that, he was able to talk through things and see things and be able to chat about things. And it really kind of changed my mindset on how to do care and how to relate with people. And, he certainly can emotionalize, but he's also diverse enough that he can feel and he can think and he can do. So, I mean, it was really important for me to see that, and it really helped me as a person, but it also helped me as a person who works in the field too.
Yeah, that's very well said, man. I think that's definitely one of the solutions that we need. We need that mindset of mentoring, that mindset of community where we are here for one another. You know what I mean? That's like that Three Musketeers type vibe, right? Well, I mean, like in all seriousness, was it one for all and all for one, right?
I think too, that's the bigger piece there. And, I do consider myself, a big picture thinker. Is that, it's just around the culture of it too, the culture of like being able to talk about your feelings and talk about what's going on, and being okay to say that it's hard, like things are hard right now or whatever. I think we have to evolve beyond kind of, just kind of swallowing it or just pushing it down and pushing it back. But that's a community effort. That's than just you and I. But I think that I think it's certainly worth it.
Well, it's definitely worth it. I mean, both of us are saying the same thing. I know a bunch of other men that have said the same thing. Just about every person that I've interviewed so far has said the same thing. It creates more satisfying experiences, more satisfying relationships. You learn more about yourself. You learn more about the other person. You feel like someone actually knows you. You know what I mean? And you actually know them when you open up about things that are hard or sad or whatever, right? Things that are filled with emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. And for a lot of guys too, you know, it's hard to be vulnerable, and it's hard to be able to talk about those things because, you know, we've never really done it, or we've been discouraged to do it. So
no one's taught us how. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's right. So that makes, so again, that's how it makes sense. So, you know, when it comes to breaking that cycle, I mean, there's so many different branches of that tree, but I do think, you know, having different relationships and experiences, role modeling that and doing it and being the, you know, I guess that's very cliche, but being that change is that's what it looks like, I think, in a lot of ways. And I it's a process.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And cutting wood helps. Cutting wood, stacking wood, drying wood.
Definitely helps me. Definitely helps. And it really does electric and the oil bill. So yeah.
Oh, dude, yeah. I get it. That resonates with me because even something came to mind when you were talking about that. Oh yeah, it was the Steve Jobs biography, and I remember how everybody used to like kind of get on his case about how anal he was about the design inside of the device that they were making.
Okay.
But, like to him, but have you read anything?
I haven't read that. No.
Oh, okay. It's, if you like biographies, it's a really good one because he was such, you know, a cultural icon, and everybody kind of knows who he is. Walter Isaacson is the one that I'm referring to. But anyways, there was, you know, mentioned throughout the book that he was super anal about the way that something was designed, even though someone's not going to see it. So if you open up your MacBook or your iPhone or whatever, assuming, you know, that this kind of way of doing things is carried on after his passing, but he was very anal about how the look of it all, like the design of the internal hardware, you know what I mean? And to a degree, I read that and I'm like, man, I get that, because like you're expressing yourself, you have a very specific idea of how you want something to be. And like you said, with the stacking of the wood, you have control over it. There is a creative element to it. It is just wood, sure. But anything that you're doing can become more than what it is when you are mindful and when you are taking that level of enjoyment out of it, because you're kind of creating that level of enjoyment for yourself. You're making a task fun. You're making a task, you know, be more than what it might be to most.
Definitely. And I think that there's definitely mindfulness, you know, components to that, which is really important.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that for me, you know, I'm doing it for me, you know, like when I do a stack or anything like that, and you know, I've seen, you know, different like Nordic and Scandinavian designs where they use different shapes and different colors, and they do all kinds of stuff, and it's really very interesting. It's like
I just want to come over and see the wood stack now. I mean, like,
oh, I'm so amateur compared to some of this stuff, but you know, it's one of those things where yes, there's a control component, and the other part is that like how I have my space and my space around me is important to me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, get that.
It like, you know, I don't have to be always clean, but I do like a bit of tidy, and I even like, you know, to you know, I like to be able to you know, cut and stack wood to a certain way, and it's kind of like some people see it, some people don't, and when they see it, it's kind of like, oh, that's interesting, you did it that way. And you know, for me, it's not about the recognition or anything like that. It's like I really don't do it for them. I do it for me, and I like how it comes out, and I like looking at it, and it's pleasurable to look at, and I enjoy it. It's no different than like, say, a piece of art on your wall, or if you like a of a car or anything like that. It's that kind of thing. So, you know, it's just about kind of setting the environment for yourself and doing that piece, but doing so in a way that there's a physical component, a physiological component, but there's an artistic component to it as well. And I like it. I'm into it.
Yeah, man. I think we would be better off as men if we all had some type of habit like that we took a deep sense of satisfaction out of, and we were willing or even, you know, excited to talk about it and share like what it is that we get out of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's like the simplest things in life, right? That you can get so much satisfaction and joy out of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, Shawn, I appreciate your time, and I've taken enough of it.
You let me know if you ever want to do this again or have a change of topic or change of conversation. I'll be happy to have a conversation with you. Really appreciate like what it is you're doing. And I didn't know what to expect exactly, but I like it.
You like it? Good.
I like it.
5 stars. 5 stars on Yelp. Awesome. All right, man. Thanks for your time. I'll let you go.
You take care, Matt.
All right. See you, brother. Bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening. I hope you found some value in this episode. If you have, be sure to share the Akkeri podcast with a friend and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can find the Akkeri on socials at the Akkeri and on the web at theakkeri.com.